high school dropout like you can't handle this deal. I'll take it from here.
Bradley Thompson sneered, waving the documents for the $10 million deal I was supposed to handle. His smug grin seemed permanently etched across his face as he stood before my desk, deliberately blocking my path. I could feel his eager anticipation as he waited to see disappointment flash across my face. His eyes bore into me with that familiar condescending stare that had become his trademark around the office. But I was assigned to... I started to protest, only to be cut off mid-sentence.
Come on.
Bradley's voice dripped with mockery.
We can't let the company go under just because we trusted some poor drop off a major deal, right? This isn't the kind of work meant for someone who couldn't even finish high school. Besides, all you're good for is grunt work anyway.
Bradley walked away without even letting me finish speaking, leaving me standing there with empty hands and a growing sense of frustration. However, you have no idea what you're getting into, I muttered under my breath, knowing full well he would soon come crawling back for my help. My name is Ethan Brooks, and I work at what might seem like a modest company from the outside. Prime Foods, a mid-sized food manufacturer with a solid local reputation. While a food manufacturing company might sound boring at first glance, it's actually incredibly fulfilling work once you get into it. I initially joined just for the paycheck as a high school dropout, but over the years, I've discovered that the employees here are wonderful people, and I found real meaning in the work we do. Above all, being able to bring smiles to people's faces through the food we create gives me a sense of pride that I never expected to find in this industry. Ethan, still at it today too? Called out Sarah from my accounting as she passed by my desk.
Man, you work fast,
Jim from Quality Control added, peering over my shoulder at the stack of completed reports. Oh, thank you, I replied, slightly embarrassed by the attention. I just thought it would be good to finish this section today, while I had the momentum going. We're the ones who should be thanking you, Sarah insisted. You always work so hard for us, Ethan. The whole department runs smoother because of you.
Working harder than anyone else, Jim chimed in. But don't overdo it. Taking care of your health is part of the job too, you know.
Yes, thank you very much, I responded, touched by the genuine concern. I've always had this mindset of finishing when I can, and I've consistently put my all into every task, no matter how small. Maybe that's why the higher-ups seem to appreciate my effort, often praising my work in ways that make me both proud and slightly uncomfortable with the attention. Every day brings a sense of accomplishment and fulfillment that I never thought possible when I first started here. But not everyone shares the same work ethic or appreciation for what we do.
Wish the department head would learn from Ethan, I overheard someone whisper near the water cooler one afternoon.
Yeah, that guy,
another voice responded with barely concealed disdain.
He brags about his Ivy League degree, but I hardly ever see him doing any actual work.
Is he really qualified to be department head?
They were talking about Bradley Thompson, of course. Bradley.
I went to Harvard.
Thompson, a man who rarely seemed to do any actual work but had somehow made it to department head through what many suspected was pure networking and family connections.
Ethan, you're a high school dropout, right?
One of my co-workers asked during lunch break one day. I nodded slightly, feeling the familiar twinge of embarrassment. Yeah, unfortunately. It's part of my past I don't particularly like to talk about, but it's also something I can't hide from. I had to drop out of high school due to family circumstances that were beyond my control at the time. My current family consists of a strong and kind mother named Marie, a stepfather I'm not blood related to, and my sister Sophie. My biological father passed away when I was young, leaving a void that took years to even begin to understand. Mom doesn't like to talk about it much, but when I was older, I learned he had been battling a terminal illness for years before I was even old enough to understand what was happening. The memory of him grows fainter with each passing year. The impact of his loss had shaped every aspect of my life. My mom struggled as a single mother raising me, working multiple jobs just to keep food on the table and a roof over our heads. Eventually, she remarried through a friend's introduction, but being young and still grieving my father's loss, I had trouble accepting my new stepfather, and we never really got close. And naturally, since we weren't blood related, my stepfather and I looked nothing alike. While he had classic French features, tall, lean, with striking blue eyes, I took after my biological father with darker features and a stockier build. I often got teased at school about how different I looked from my father. Kids can be cruel without even realizing the weight of their words.
Hey, about your dad,
classmate would start, only to be cut off by my sharp, "Shut up!" A few years after Mom's remarriage, I had started hating even talking about my stepfather with friends. My growing dislike was partly due to how rarely I got to see him. But looking back now, I realized I was probably doing my fair share to avoid any interaction. My stepfather seemed extremely busy with work and was hardly ever home. I could tell he was coming home every day because I'd see Mom busily preparing meals. But between his schedule and my own tendency to avoid him, we rarely crossed paths. While things were still awkward between my stepfather and me, Mom and he had a baby, my half-sister. She was the most adorable little girl I'd ever seen, with big blue eyes that seemed to take in everything around her with wonder. Sophie. Her name is Sophie, Ethan. Mom had told me softly one day, cradling the tiny bundle in her arms. Sophie, I repeated, and as if recognizing her name, baby Sophie looked at me and smiled, even though she was too young to understand words. My sister grew up beautifully, developing into a stunning young woman who somehow managed to bridge the gap between our fractured family dynamics. While she treated me well as her big brother and we got along wonderfully, I somehow felt like an outsider in the family dynamic between my stepfather, mother, and sister. One day, after much internal debate, I approached my mother with a decision I had been contemplating for months. Mom, I want to start working, I said quietly one evening as she was preparing dinner. She turned from the stove, surprise evident on her face. What? But your stepfather has set aside money for college. You don't need to worry about that. I don't want to go to college. I want to start working right away. The words came out more firmly than I expected. Mom was quiet for a long moment, studying my face with the kind of understanding that only mothers seem capable of. Well, if that's what you want to do, that's fine. While she gently suggested college might be worth considering, when I told her I wanted to work instead, Mom quietly gave me her blessing. She had always been good at reading me, knowing when to push and when to let me find my own way. I left home to start working without even telling my stepfather, practically running away after graduating high school. Finding work as a high school dropout wasn't easy. I faced rejection after rejection, each one reinforcing the voice in my head that said I made a mistake. But then Prime Foods turned out to be my destiny. They were willing to hire me despite my lack of education. It started when the CEO, Marcus Chen, took a liking to me during the interview.
Oh, your education ended with high school?
He asked, reviewing my sparse resume. Yes, but I'll work harder than anyone else. I'll put my life into it. Please, give me a chance. I promise you won't regret it. The words tumbled out with an intensity that surprised even me. Mr. Chen leaned back in his chair, studying me with keen interest.
I like your spirit. You've got guts.
A smile spread across his face as he extended his hand.
Welcome aboard.
I later learned that Mr. Chen hired me because he liked my determination and the look in my eyes. He told me he saw something familiar there, the same hunger for success that had driven him when he first started the company 20 years ago. I threw myself into my work, wanting to repay Mr. Chen's faith in me. Every task, no matter how small, received my full attention and effort. I was determined to prove that his gamble on me hadn't been a mistake. But then, one day, I accidentally discovered Mr. Chen and several senior employees having what looked like a serious conversation. It happened in the break room of all places. I was heading there to get some coffee when I spotted them hunched over some documents, their expressions grave. I hesitated to interrupt them, but then Mr. Chen happened to look up and notice me.
Oh, Ethan, good work today.
He called out, trying to inject some cheerfulness into his voice. Thank you, sir. Is that last year's financial report? What's going on?
Well...
Mr. Chen gave a weak smile and pulled out this year's performance charts to show me. The trend was unmistakably downward, a steady decline that had been accelerating over the past few months. The company had been slowly but surely falling into the red, and the situation was becoming critical.
Business hasn't been great lately,
Mr. Chen admitted, his usual confidence notably absent.
We're considering becoming a subsidiary of a larger corporation. I'm worried about the employees who might not like taking a pay cut, so we're looking to places where I can help them find new jobs.
What? No way! The words escaped me before I could stop them.
It might be time to tell everyone. We need to move quickly before people lose their chances at finding new positions. You should start thinking about it too, Ethan.
With that, Mr. Chen left the break room, his shoulders slightly hunched under the weight of his responsibilities. The other employees nodded grimly and returned to their work as well. I stood there frozen, forgetting all about my coffee. The thought of this company, my company, disappearing felt like a physical blow. I wanted to work even harder for this place. But would that even matter if we were about to close our doors? After work that evening, I couldn't stop thinking about the company's situation. Even in bed that night, my mind kept racing through possible solutions, each one seeming more unlikely than the last. The image of Mr. Chen's worried face kept appearing in my thoughts, along with the faces of all my coworkers who had become like family to me over the years. There must be something I can do. Anything, I muttered to myself, staring at the ceiling of my small apartment. Just then, my phone buzzed on the nightstand, the screen illuminating the darkened room. Looking at the display, I saw it was for my sister Sophie. A smile involuntarily crossed my face. Her timing had always been uncanny. "Hello?" I answered, sitting up in bed. "Oh, big bro! Great work today!" Sophie's cheerful voice came through clearly, instantly lifting my spirits. She and I had stayed in close contact even after I left home, something I was internally grateful for. She seemed to worry about me a lot and called frequently, usually 2 or 3 times a week. I was happy to maintain this connection with my family, so our calls had become a cherished routine that helped anchor my weeks. "How's Mom?" I asked, then after a brief hesitation added, "And Dad too." "They're both doing great," Sophie exclaimed. "Mom made these amazing giant burgers the other day. They were so good. You should come over and try them sometime. Dad couldn't stop talking about how they reminded him of this little bistro in Paris." "Yeah, maybe," I replied noncommittally, though I felt relieved hearing about Mom. Despite everything, I had worried about her when I left, wondering if my decision had hurt her more than she let on. "Oh yeah, big bro." Sophie's voice took on a more serious tone. "You work at Prime Foods, right?" "Yeah. Why?" The sudden change in topic caught my attention. "Do you think you could get me in touch with your CEO? For business stuff? It's kind of important." "Wait, my company?" The question was so unexpected that I had to ask Sophie to repeat herself several times to make sure I heard her correctly. As she explained, apparently there was a major corporation looking for mid-sized companies to partner with, but they hadn't found the right match yet. She had thought of me when she heard about this opportunity, knowing our company's reputation for quality products. "Even just a meeting might be worth looking into, right?" Sophie suggested. "I mean, what's the worst that could happen?" "Just a meeting. Okay, I'll ask the CEO about it." I agreed, my mind already racing with possibilities. Could this be the solution we needed? The next morning, I headed to Mr. Chen's office as soon as I arrived at work, my heart pounding with nervous energy. Standing outside his door, I took a deep breath to compose myself before knocking.
"Come in."
Mr. Chen's voice called from inside. When I heard his response, I opened the door with a polite, "Excuse me." "Oh, Bradley's here too." The words slipped out before I could stop them, as I noticed our department head lounging in one of the chairs opposite Mr. Chen's desk. Bradley Thompson was indeed there, looking as perfectly coiffed as ever in his expensive suit. Perhaps they were discussing the company's financial situation. Mr. Chen's forehead was creased with worry lines from what must have been a serious conversation.
"Ethan, what can I do for you?"
Mr. Chen asked, gesturing for me to take a seat. "Yes, sir. I wanted to discuss something. Now a good time?" Mr. Chen motioned to the empty chair next to Bradley, so I sat down, trying to ignore the way Bradley shifted slightly away from me, as if being a high school dropout was contagious. Though Bradley's presence bothered me, he showed no signs of leaving, so I proceeded to tell Mr. Chen about what Sophie had mentioned. I handed over the contact information and company materials I prepared the night before, staying up late to make sure everything was perfect. After I finished speaking, Bradley was the first to respond, not Mr. Chen.
"This deal could bring in $10 million in profits and save the company,"
he exclaimed, suddenly sitting up straight.
"What do you think, sir?"
He spoke as if he had been the one to bring in the opportunity, his voice taking on that familiar self-important tone. However, Mr. Chen was too absorbed in reviewing the materials to notice, carefully considering every page of the proposal. After showing signs of deliberation, he turned to me with a determined look I hadn't seen in weeks.
"Let's pursue this lead,"
he declared firmly.
"I want the whole company working on securing this deal."
Then he reached across his desk and grasped my hand firmly.
"Ethan, thank you so much. Since you brought this to us, I want you to take the lead on this. Would you be willing to spearhead this project?"
"Yes, leave it to me." I squeezed his hand back in agreement, trying to contain my excitement. I immediately left the CEO's office ready to get started. My mind was already racing with plans and preparations that needed to be made. "All right, I'll make this deed succeed no matter what," I muttered to myself, clutching my fist with determination. as I headed back to my department to start organizing the project. However, a familiar voice stopped me in my tracks.
Hey, why are you getting all fired up?
Huh? I turned to find Bradley, who had left the CEO's office with me, standing uncomfortably close. He slapped my back mockingly, harder than necessary. Ow! I couldn't help but wince at the impact.
I'll be taking charge of this presentation, so just follow my lead,
He declared with his trademark smirk.
Obviously, someone from Harvard like me would do a better job than a dropout like you.
But the CEO said I should... I started to protest, only to be cut off again.
Don't be naive.
Bradley scoffed.
The CEO was just being nice because you brought in the lead. He obviously expects you to say you can't handle it and pass it to me. I mean, come on. They wouldn't really trust a dropout of a deal that could make or break the company. Read the room. This is why uneducated people are so stupid.
With that, he snatched all the materials I had brought from my hands, nearly tearing some of the pages in his haste.
Make sure you gather all the background info and prep the materials,
He ordered, already walking away.
Can't move forward without the grunt work done. Well, time for me to finally show what I can really do.
From that day on, I found myself gathering materials and doing research under Bradley's direction. I had to prepare all the meeting documents and investigate everything that needed to be checked beforehand. The work itself didn't bother me since I had thought it would be my responsibility anyway. But Bradley kept taking credit for everything I prepared. In meetings with Mr. Chen, he would present my research as his own, adding his own flourishes and embellishments that often missed the point entirely. I could see the confusion on Mr. Chen's face sometimes when Bradley would fumble through explanations of data I had meticulously compiled. This is Sophie's lead, I reminded myself during particularly frustrating moments. I can't waste time arguing with Bradley. Instead of fighting about who's in charge, I need to focus on turning the company around. I had plenty I wanted to say to Bradley. Each time he took credit for my work or made another snide comment about my education, words of protest bubbled up in my throat. But rather than waste time arguing about who was assigned to what, I wanted to use what time to prepare for the meetings. The company's survival was more important than my pride. I threw myself into making the deal succeed, often staying late into the night to ensure everything was perfect. My coworkers noticed my dedication, offering encouragement and support when they could. Don't let him get to you, Ethan, Sarah from accounting would say, bringing me coffee during my late night work sessions. We all know who's really doing that work here. A few days later, the day of the video conference with the client finally arrived. I waited for Mr. Chen with my meticulously prepared materials, having triple-checked everything that morning.
Shall we head in, Ethan?
Mr. Chen called out as he approached my desk. Yes, sir! I responded with enthusiasm, gathering my materials. But then a voice called out to stop us.
Sir!
A composed voice came from the hallway. There stood Bradley, dressed in an unusually sharp suit that probably cost more than my month's salary. Without even glancing at me, he addressed Mr. Chen.
I'll be handling today's video conference.
What? I couldn't help but let out a surprised sound. To suddenly announce he's taking over right before the meeting. It was bold, even for Bradley.
Bradley, you're going to handle it?
Mr. Chen asked, his brow furrowing slightly. When the CEO asked, Bradley laughed and slapped my back again, the same forceful impact as always.
Think about it, sir,
he said with exaggerated patience.
Between someone nervous like him and an experienced department head like me, for a meeting that could determine the company's fate, isn't it obvious you should send me?
But we originally assigned this to Ethan, Mr. Chen protested. He should at least attend the meeting.
At least attend. The words stung more than they should have. I gathered all the materials and prepared all the documents. Bradley must have been reporting everything as his own work, taking credit for my late nights and careful preparation. I couldn't help but sigh, feeling the weight of the situation. But Bradley tried to even use that sigh to his advantage, pointing at me with an exaggerated, "See?
Look how exhausted he looks,"
Bradley exclaimed.
It would be disrespectful to bring someone in this state to meet the client. They might get even angry about having a mere employee at such an important meeting. Is that what you want? As department head, I shall handle this.
Bradley kept emphasizing his higher position compared to mine, each mention of department head growing more forceful. Mr. Chen looked between his watch, Bradley, and me several times, clearly conflicted about the situation unfolding before him. Then he turned to me, his eyes seeking answers.
What do you think, Ethan?
I met the CEO's eyes with a serious expression, pushing down my frustration. I just want the deal to succeed. Bradley is technically my superior, so maybe it will look better from the client's perspective. Words tasted bitter in my mouth, but I just wanted the deal to work out no matter what. Besides, we were running out of time. Knowing how persistent Bradley could be, I worried that arguing now could make us late for the meeting. Or worse, he might try to barge in during the middle of it. Better to take the safest, most certain path forward, I told myself, even as my hands clenched into fists at my side.
I understand,
Mr. Chen said finally. Those expressions suggested he didn't entirely agree.
Bradley, grab the materials and let's go. We need to leave with plenty of time to spare.
You got it, boss.
Bradley's enthusiasm was almost offensive in its fakeness.
Leave everything to me.
He enthusiastically gathered materials and adjusted his suit for what must have been the 100th time that morning. As Mr. Chen headed to the conference room, I could see he still looked concerned about me, glancing back several times as if he wanted to say something more. As he left, Bradley leaned in close, his breath hot against my ear as he whispered,
Saved yourself some embarrassment there. Just keep being my errand boy, dropout.
Before I could respond, Bradley hurried after Mr. Chen to the conference room, leaving me standing alone in the hallway. While his words stung, I was more concerned about the company's survival than anything else. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to go very wrong. 10 minutes later, my suspicions were confirmed.
Ethan, are you here?
The sound of rapid footsteps accompanied Mr. Chen's frantic voice. While I was catching up on accumulated work and worrying about the meeting, the CEO came running through the office, calling my name with increasing urgency. The usually well-composed Mr. Chen was sweating as he searched for me. His tie askew and his typically neat hair disheveled. Something had clearly gone very wrong. "Sir, I'm here!" I called out, standing up from my desk. "What's wrong?"
Ethan, we have a problem.
Mr. Chen grabbed my arm, already pulling me towards the conference room.
A big problem.
"What happened?" I asked, trying to keep up with his pace.
The client's representative is French and...
"Yes, their headquarters is in France, but..." I started to confirm, only to be cut off by Mr. Chen's increasingly panicked voice.
They're speaking French, and I'm ashamed to say neither Bradley nor I can speak it.
The words tumbled out in a rush as we practically ran down the hallway. What? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Hadn't Bradley read any of the preparation materials? I rushed with Mr. Chen to the conference room, our footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. When we entered, I heard terribly broken English coming from the front of the room.
Yes, very good business. We make food, yes?
The source of this butchered English was Bradley, who had been so confident heading into the meeting. He was standing awkwardly in front of the video screen, sweat visible on his forehead as he gestured wildly, as if hand movements could somehow bridge the language gap. I almost burst out laughing at how pathetic he looked, but seeing the confused and increasingly annoyed client on the computer screen, I quickly took my place beside Bradley. "Bonjour, je m'appelle Ethan Brooks," I said smoothly in perfect French. "I apologize for keeping you waiting." Bradley's eyes widened in shock at my fluent French, his jaw literally dropping as he turned to stare at me. But I had no time to worry about his reaction. We had a deal to save. The client's representative, a distinguished-looking man in his 50s, immediately brightened on the screen.
Thank goodness. I'm so relieved to find someone who can communicate properly.
Truly sorry about the confusion, I continued in French, bowing slightly to show respect.
No, don't apologize, the client said warmly. You Americans are always so formal. But now we can finally get started. Looking forward to working with you.
Likewise, thank you for your time, I responded, feeling the tension in the room start to dissipate. The client leaned in conspiratorially and added in French.
Oh, and by the way, that other guy? His French was obviously non-existent, but his English was atrocious too. Just between us, of course.
I couldn't help but laugh, and somehow that broke the tension perfectly. The client joined in, and even Mr. Chen smiled, though he couldn't understand what was being said. Then we got down to the details of the contract. I explained things to Mr. Chen as we went along, seamlessly switching between French and English to keep everyone informed. The client was very impressed with the materials I had prepared, commenting several times on the thoroughness of our research and preparation. After setting up a date for an in-person meeting and discussing several potential partnership opportunities, we successfully concluded the video conference. When the screen switched off, Mr. Chen and I let out simultaneous sighs of relief. Bradley, however, had a very different reaction.
Hey, what the hell, Ethan?
He exploded, his face red with anger and embarrassment.
You never told me this would be in French.
He seemed to think I had deliberately kept the French requirement from him, trying to set him up for failure, but I calmly pointed to the materials still scattered across the conference table. It's right here in the documents, I said quietly, pulling out their overview page. I added notes about it. I also told you directly, Bradley, and informed the CEO. When you insisted on handling it anyway, I assumed you could speak French. Bradley snatched the papers from my hand and checked the materials. There it was, clearly written in the key points section. As headquarters is in France, French language capability required.
What's going on here?
Mr. Chen's voice cut through the tension like a knife.
Bradley, didn't you say you prepared these materials?
Bradley couldn't form a coherent response, just stammering excuses. His face grew even redder.
I've been wondering why Bradley was giving me progress reports when I assigned this to Ethan.
Mr. Chen continued, his voice growing harder with each word.
I trusted you because you said Ethan asked you to take over.
Well, sir, that's...
Bradley's voice has lost all its usual arrogance, reduced to barely more than a whisper.
That's enough for today.
Mr. Chen cut him off.
I'll decide on your disciplinary action later. You're dismissed for the day.
But sir!
Bradley's face had turned pale, a stark contrast to its earlier redness. He stared at the floor, unable to even look at me. But Mr. Chen had clearly ended the conversation, ignoring Bradley completely as he turned to face me.
Ethan, I'm so sorry.
Mr. Chen's voice was heavy with regret.
I should have verified things myself. This deal moved forward thanks to you. Thank you so much.
No, I just wanted to repay you for hiring me when no one else would. I replied honestly, remembering that first interview and the chance he had taken on me.
Would you be willing to officially take charge of the project now?
Mr. Chen asked, though we both knew it was more of a formality at this point. Of course! I straightened up, feeling a surge of pride. I'll give it everything I got.
Thank you. Counting on you to see this through to completion.
Mr. Chen's smile was genuine as he clasped my shoulder. And so, I officially became the lead on this major project. The transition was smoother than I expected. Most of the team had been working with me anyway, coming to me with questions rather than Bradley even before this incident. Having been removed from the project, Bradley found himself completely isolated in an office. His usual supporters disappeared overnight, leaving him alone with the consequences of his actions. With no one willing to work with him anymore, he apparently found the workplace too uncomfortable and resigned on his own within a week. I continued to move the deal forward smoothly, working directly with our French partners to ensure every detail was perfect. When the final contracts were signed, we had successfully secured the $10 million deal that would save Prime Foods. That was amazing, Ethan! You're our savior! Sarah exclaimed, leading the celebration when Mr. Chen and I returned to the office after the final signing.
Who knew you could speak French?
Jim added, slapping me on the back, though much more gently than Bradley ever had. It was just luck that I happened to know French, I demurred, feeling my face grow warm at all the attention. The deal succeeded thanks to everyone's help. This guy, always so humble. Sarah laughed, ruffling my hair playfully as others gathered around to join the celebration. I truly love these people, I thought as I looked around at their smiling faces. They've become my second family over the years, and I wondered if I was able to help them in the company, even a little bit, to repay all they had given me. For the first time in my career, I felt completely fulfilled. There's still one more thing I needed to do. A few days later, after the successful deal was finalized, I contacted Sophie. I wanted to thank her as soon as possible for her role in saving the company. We decided to meet for dinner on my day off, so here I was, waiting at her favorite cafe with a bag of her favorite snacks. The same ones she used to steal from my room when we were younger. Ah, there she is, I muttered as I spotted her approaching. Big bro! Sophie's voice carried across the crowded street before I could even stand up. I spotted her easily. It was impossible not to notice her because everyone around was staring. Fair skin, striking blue eyes, long graceful limbs, her model-like appearance stood out anywhere in America. My sister Sophie was half French, though most people assumed she was fully European at first glance. Yes, my mother had remarried a Frenchman, a fact that had shaped all our lives in ways I was only now beginning to fully understand. My new stepfather rarely tried to speak English in those early days. As a result, most conversation at home were in French. Still young and dealing with the shock of losing my biological father, I had struggled to accept my new French stepfather, unable to embrace him or his culture right away. Perhaps out of rebellion, I refused to speak French at home, creating yet another barrier between us. Every time Mom and Dad spoke happily together in their shared language, I felt more and more isolated. However, after my sister was born, everything began to change. Taking care of her naturally led me to speak both French and English, as she babbled away in whatever mixture of languages came to her mind. In the end, constantly hearing Mom and Dad's French conversations and speaking both languages with my sister helped me become fluent in everyday French. While I might not have mastered business French until later, It had become a familiar second language, as natural to me as English. Sophie, thank you so much for this, I said once we were seated at our favorite table by the window. Thanks to you, the company might survive. Sophie took a sip of her juice and smiled at me. That same bright smile that had charmed everyone since she was a baby. Come on, the deal happened because of you. Then she continued with a knowing look. But you know, it wasn't actually from me. It was from Dad. What? The word came out barely above a whisper as I tried to process what she just said. Dad's always been worried about you, Sophie explained gently. He even regularly asked Mom about your company and how you were doing. Dad did? I couldn't quite believe what I was hearing. The dad I barely talked to at home. He had been worried about me? That's when Sophie told me something I never knew. Dad runs a French trading company. The client company that was introduced to us was one of Dad's business partners. All this time, he'd been watching over me from a distance, looking for ways to help without pushing himself into my life. We might not have talked about it in front of you, but Mom, Dad, and I often discussed you, Sophie revealed. Dad was so concerned that I actually told him a bit about your work situations when you confided in me. You told Dad? I sank lower in my chair. It's so embarrassing. Sophie grabbed my hand and looked at me seriously. Her blue eyes, so like our father's, full of emotion. We're family. There's nothing to be embarrassed about, she insisted. Dad really respects how you become such a capable professional. Right, Dad? Huh? Sophie turned around with a grin, and I stood up in shock. There was Dad, looking awkwardly in his perfectly tailored suit, standing just inside the cafe's entrance. Dad? My voice crackled slightly on the word. Big bro and Dad never talk, so I brought him along, Sophie explained cheerfully. You wanted to say something to him, right, Dad? I nervously looked at Dad, noticing how he seemed tense too, taking a while to start speaking. Sophie got him seated and patted his back encouragingly, playing her usual role as a family mediator. Then Dad spoke, his voice rougher than I remembered.
I'm sorry.
What? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He spoke in English, not French. The man who had always refused to speak English was now using it, despite his obvious discomfort.
I should have studied English more,
He continued haltingly.
Back then, I only focused on work.
No, but you were busy because... I started to protest, but the words caught in my throat as understanding dawned. I understood now. Dad had been busy back then for Mom's sake. He worked so hard to make sure my newly remarried mother wouldn't struggle, throwing himself into providing for us financially when he couldn't figure out how to connect with me emotionally. I'm sorry. I should be the one. I'm sorry, Dad. The words tumbled out as years of misunderstanding finally began to crumble.
No, Ethan shouldn't apologize.
Dad insisted in his careful English.
I'm the one who's sorry.
Dad carefully chose his English words as he spoke to me, obviously having practiced this conversation. He seemed to only know basic vocabulary, repeatedly saying sorry as if it was the most important word he needed me to hear. Dad, thank you, I managed to say past the lump in my throat, for learning English.
Sorry my English is still bad.
He apologized again. Then he continued with determination.
Ethan, I wanted to apologize for everything. I couldn't be there for you when you were young because of work. I didn't know how to connect with a child who had just lost his father.
I was just being difficult back then, I admitted, feeling tears starting to well up. You were working so hard for Mom's sake. Dad bowed his head before me, a gesture that seemed to contain all the years of regret and unspoken words between us. The father who had felt so distant, who I couldn't consider family for so long, finally felt like a real dad. My vision blurred as tears started flowing freely now. Sophie gently rubbed my back, just as she had when we were children, and I would get upset. See, big bro? You can rely on us more. We're family, she said softly. Yeah. I managed to agree through my tears.
Ethan, we are family.
Dad added in his careful English, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. And so, Dad and I finally cleared the air about everything from back then. All the complicated feelings I'd been carrying suddenly lifted, and I found myself smiling naturally for what felt like the first time in years. I'll never forget this day. I learned that even if you share a language, relationships can still break down without expressing your feelings, even with family. If only I had properly conveyed my feelings to Dad back then, we might have built a different kind of relationship. Even people who speak the same language can miss each other completely if they don't make the effort to truly communicate. If I hadn't been so stubborn, if I had tried harder to face Dad directly instead of running away. As I was lost in these thoughts, Dad suddenly said something that brought me crashing back to the present.
Ethan, Mom's burgers, too thick. LOL. ROFL.
Wait, Sophie, teach him proper English, not internet slang. I protested, unable to hold back my laughter. What? But isn't modern slang better? Sophie asked innocently, though her grin gave away her mischief. Might have taken a roundabout path, but I finally felt like a true member of my family. As we sat there laughing together in the cafe, I realized that sometimes the longest journeys lead us right back home. We just need to be willing to take that first step forward. Looking at Dad's smiling face and Sophie's triumphant grin, I knew that while I might have saved the company, my family had saved something far more important. They have saved me from myself, showing me that it's never too late to bridge the gap between us, no matter how wide they might seem.